Now, let's turn to the subject at hand, and that is to talk about the recovery effort. It commenced immediately, and that's one inspiring thing about our region. We had smart people, generous people, compassionate people who mobilized themselves immediately. I want to review for you one slide that we looked at yesterday, which laid out for you a sense of the magnitude of the effort. In almost no time at all, our region had mobilized about $94 million. And that was across multiple funds. The sources were public, private, and generous individuals. And those funds were put immediately to work. In fact, most of them have been completely expended. 61% of the funds went to survival. It went to direct needs, food, shelter, and the basic survival needs of the recipients. Then they were spread over other categories as well: help for small businesses, help for nonprofits, and other kinds of organizations. There were two major efforts that came to life in the immediate aftermath of the sheltering orders. One was based in Santa Clara County, and one was based in San Mateo County. And we're going to talk about both of those. So I'd like to start by talking about the Silicon Valley effort, the one that started in Santa Clara County. It was convened by San Jose Mayor Sam Liccardo, and it was remarkable. In fact, I would like to just make one observation here at the very top. There's something remarkable about both of the efforts in both of the counties. They were distinctive in several ways. One way they were distinctive is because they were cross-sector efforts. We've observed other regions, and a lot of those recovery efforts were led by the public sector and elected officials and their appointed representatives. That has not been the case here in Silicon Valley. Private sector, the social services sector, and the public sector have been working in a very close set of partnerships. So that's distinctive. What's also distinctive is that the efforts have not been focused just on reopening. And again, as we look at other regions around the country, that seems to have been the focus. How can we reopen the economy? How can we get there as quickly as possible? These efforts have, of course, asked that question, but they've gone beyond. They've been posing another question, which is, when we reopen, can we actually be better? Can we build back better, stronger, more effective, more inclusive? So that's actually quite striking. A third thing that's striking about both efforts is the focus on equity. And that has been established as a priority, so that the recovery would actually be lifting all of the boats, and that we could be building an economy that had better access for the people that have heretofore been underrepresented. Okay, so those are the striking things. Now, the Silicon Valley effort that was chaired by Mayor Liccardo had 60 members serving on it, and then it had several co-chairs that were spread across all of these different sectors. The level of participation was truly impressive. The group organized around 4 key topics, and they had to do with how we reopen, how do we make the economy more inclusive, how do we enable businesses to weather the crisis and get to the point of reopening, and then how do we build a better foundation for the economy that we envision when the pandemic is over. So this group was deep thinking and sweeping in their recommendations. They actually created 28 different recommendations. I won't summarize them for you, that would be tedious, but they fell into 6 different areas, silos, buckets, you could call them. And they looked at strengthening financial stability, job creation, looked at housing issues, reimagining our neighborhood districts, and especially thinking about digital inclusion. So all of those recommendations were published after a 100-day period, and then came the next step, which was to envision a way that we could be working on those recommendations through new and creative partnerships. And that work is, of course, still proceeding. Now, a brief word about the San Mateo recovery effort. That was very much analogous to what was happening in the Santa Clara County effort. They had even more widespread participation. 168 members of this group. They split themselves into 2 key advisory groups. They created 5 committees. It was also multi-sector. I already said that, but it included deep participation from county staff, city staff, private sector representatives, and more. This group issued a report that had, again, sweeping recommendations, 125 of them. They were broken out over 4 different guiding principles. And those principles for the county, for San Mateo County, were focused around public health, around equity, around fiscal responsibility, and then around community-wide collaboration. By the way, we encourage you to avail yourselves of these reports. You might think me a geek, but I found them far more interesting and inspiring than mere policy wonk documents. They were actually, they were uplifting. Now, here's what's interesting. The 2 efforts were distinct, and they generated their own sets of recommendations. We've broken them out for you in this Venn diagram. So San Mateo County emphasizing some particular things, Santa Clara also doing the same, Santa Clara with maybe a focus on job creation, and San Mateo County focusing on reducing spread and so forth. But there was an overlap, and the overlap is striking to us. And here's where the overlap was. Both counties have made it a priority to bridge the digital divide, to provide active and safe public transportation, to be supporting local businesses. Those emerge as the 3 key priorities across both of the counties. So I want to talk about the progress that we've made to date. First, I want to say that some really amazing things happened right off the bat. And we can say that it was as a result of these 2 recovery efforts. For example, there was a cross-sector effort to build new websites where local businesses could learn about reopening protocols and how they could have better access to the personal protective equipment. For another example, there were robust cross-sector contact tracing efforts that went into place, and those were leveraging public, private, and social sector resources. Then there were joint efforts that sprang up immediately to work across the financial tech sector, the traditional banking institutions, and social impact organizations, so that our minority communities could have better access to financial services. And then also there were things that sprung up, such as the Bridge to Recovery and its task forces, a workforce development task force and a social safety net task force. So all of those things were happening right off the bat. But then I want to make a second point, which is that there are other things that are happening, and we have to frankly say that they're happening independently unto themselves, following their own dynamics at the grassroots level. Thousands of flowers have bloomed on our landscape. We have to observe that those things are happening without coordination, and they're happening following their own dynamics. And I'm actually going to give you just a couple of examples of them. Here on the slide, you're seeing some of the dozens and dozens of organizations that are out there doing heroic work. Let me just make a couple of examples. For example, the Digital Inclusion Fund that has taken hold in San Jose. This is an effort that ascertained that about 55% of low-income residents were not connected to the internet. And so this is an effort that was able to identify a shortage of at least 67,000 devices in schools. And by Christmas, 54,000 of those devices had actually been delivered and installed. And now the group is working with providers to make other refurbished devices available. And I think the mayor will tell you that they have now been able to successfully connect more than 100,000 homes throughout San Jose that did not have access otherwise. The Digital Inclusion Partnership continues. They are working with groups to swap refurbishment services. They're identifying in-kind resources, and they're making contributions to a digital inclusion fund, which is, I think, on track to generate about $100,000 in revenue over the coming months. So that's an impressive effort. Another interesting effort has been the San Jose Cares Work Experience Program. And this is an effort that's leveraging CARES Act, the federal act, that has enabled us to take funds that can train dislocated workers. And the effort also includes funds that provide other supporting services, including food, shelter, and help with the rent. Goodwill has come forward as taking the leadership role on case management services and working in relationship and partnership with San Jose and its Work to Future, the Workforce Investment Board. And now hundreds of people have participated. It's not equal to the need that is out there, but it is it's been an amazing first step. Another amazing example that we could point to is Destination Home, which works across our region. They've come into a partnership with Sacred Heart. They've drawn on the generosity of the private sector, including an enormous role, an outsized role that was played by Cisco Systems. And because of their efforts and their leadership, $31 million have been mobilized that have been applied to households that were in desperate need. And we can now say that at least 14,000 low-income households that were on the brink, that were on the bubble of becoming homeless, they have been saved. They've been transferred into more sustainable forms of living and livelihood, and of course, basic shelter. There's also been grants, small business grants, and San Mateo County has mobilized an effort there. This is an effort to help local businesses do a better job of securing grants from multiple sources, but including primarily federal sources, and then private foundations, including, for example, the Chan Zuckerberg Initiative. And this is a group that has been able to oversee a process of putting out at least 450 grants across their county. The grants average around $10,000, and there's been more than $2 million pledged for grants going forward in 2021. Then there's Silicon Valley Community Foundation, and we'll be talking with the CEO here momentarily. But that community foundation is the nation's largest foundation. It spans both counties, and they have been able to distribute at least 20 million in grants to individual families. They have distributed at least 12 million to nonprofits across the region, and 3 million have gone out to small businesses. And that's just as of December 31. There is more in the field, and there's more to come from Silicon Valley Community Foundation. Well, let me wrap before introducing our guests by telling you that here we are almost 1 year later, and we are not out of this thing. The COVID cases continue to come. There are new variants of the disease that are rearing their ugly head, and we still are facing massive amounts of unemployment. We reviewed these figures very carefully yesterday. So there is a lot of hard work yet in front of Silicon Valley. The way that we are trying to think about it is, where do we go from here? How do we build on the terrific work that was forwarded by these two groups? How do we translate their recommendations into reality? How do we mobilize in new combinations so that that will be possible? And how do we accelerate the effort? So that's the question that faces us as a region. And I would like to frame it for you in this way. There are at least 5 unanswered questions, let's put it that way. One is the vaccine itself. How are we going to roll out the vaccine? How do we mount an education effort so people are comfortable with the vaccine and everybody is taking full advantage? That's one set of issues that we'll have to confront. Another is our continuing efficacy on the grant front. How do we identify them? The people that most need them are the people that have the fewest tools so that they can apply, and of course, the least bandwidth. How do we mobilize across the region on that front? Another is how do we take all of these efforts, some of which have been coordinated, but many are not, right? Many are just happening unto their own dynamics. How do we achieve scale? How do we achieve integration? That's a question that still assails us. The private sector has been amazing. Let's stipulate that over and over. Let's also say that there are continuing questions, and we look forward to a robust discussion and dialogue with the private sector about a number of questions, like how do we increase access, inclusion? How do we look at hiring practices? Are there other things that we can be doing on the recovery front so that those who have been affected adversely and affected the most can realize bridges to opportunity and to self-sufficiency? And then there's even one last question, and that is, should we be creating something different? We live in a region, but regions don't have any overarching apparatus for planning and decision making. And so most of the things that happen at a regional scale happen in the way that I've been describing it. They just happen. And people make partnerships and they try to come together in collaborations. But there is a question: should we create something more? Should we create a backbone? Should we create a spine? Should we create infrastructure so that the region can be more coordinated and more assertive on the recovery front? So I think that is a summary of the questions that we are facing, and also a summary of the efforts, the heroic efforts that we've seen to date in Silicon Valley. Now, I would like to introduce my guests for this session, and in our remaining minutes, we're going to have a dialogue. So our first guest is Nicole Taylor. She is the President and CEO of Silicon Valley Community Foundation. And I mentioned to you that that is the nation's largest foundation, and the foundation has been amazing under these circumstances. So Nicole, thanks for joining us today.
Absolutely.
Yes, and Nicole, I also mentioned, is the co-chair of Joint Venture Silicon Valley. We've mentioned that many times, but we're so proud of it that we're going to keep saying it over. Now, we're also joined by His Honor, Mayor Sam Liccardo. He is the mayor of the nation's 10th largest city. And Mayor Liccardo, thank you for your Herculean efforts, everything that you're doing on a city scale, but also on a regional scale.
Thanks, Russ. Good to be with you, Nicole.
Yeah, good to be with you too.
Let's talk. I guess I'll ask you the first question, Mr. Mayor, which is, how are you doing? You didn't sign up for this.
We only have a few minutes, Russ.
I'm sweating, Russ. I was worried you were just going to come at me and grill me, so I'm sweating. That's what I'm doing.
I am going to grill you. But it occurred to me that when you become the mayor of a city, it's sort of like getting married. It's a pledge, right? You pledge for better or for worse. And you got dealt the worst. You got dealt a pandemic.
We all got it hard.
And as you look back, I want you to tell me what you're most proud of in your city, and then what you wish you could be doing more effectively. Let's start there.
Yeah, what I'm most proud of is just how incredibly this community has pulled together in a really tough time. And what we saw just within the first few weeks of the pandemic, we launched Silicon Valley Strong website, encouraged folks to volunteer to distribute food and do lots of other things we critically need to do to help families in need. More than 4,000 people signed up and are out there volunteering right now. You mentioned the work that Jen Loving did, which was tremendous. Destination Home with Chuck Robbins at Cisco, and we all worked together to raise lots of money, and Chuck did an amazing job of that. And the cities kicked in some money, and the county did too. And now we've distributed more than $45 million in funds to families in need. Just a lot of generosity, a lot of folks coming out to do whatever they could to help. I'm also really proud of how I think just within our own city workforce, a lot of folks had to drop whatever they were doing and pivot and do things a lot differently, faster, more nimbly, whether it was building 3 affordable housing projects for homeless residents that, we built the first one in 4 months. It typically takes 4 or 5 years, and doing it at incredibly low cost because of some help we had with some waivers of different red tape. Those kinds of things give me heart that we really can get to a better normal, not just a new normal, as Lisa Sue would say. And that's been really exciting for me. The one thing I'd like to do that we're not doing, and I'm really digging in deep on this, is we've got to have a significant jobs program. We saw that in the 1930s during the Roosevelt administration, an incredible program through the Conservation Corps and other initiatives. And, we were just talking to the White House today, and we're leading a coalition of mayors to really get behind a resilience corps, something along those lines. We've got to get jobs to a lot of particularly young adults who are displaced by this pandemic. And it is a bad thing in any society when you have a lot of young adults who don't have jobs and don't see hope. And so we're going to be digging in deep on this and talking to a lot of partners about how we can expand a jobs program, maybe using some FEMA reimbursement and other sources.
Mayor, can you do that on a city scale, or does it need to be done on a larger scale?
Well, we're going to try doing, we were just talking to the county this morning about how we could do it just for pandemic response. So we're going to certainly look and see how we can do it locally. But we're already, 23 mayors signed a letter with me to go to the White House saying, we want to see this on a national scale. We've got a receptive administration, certainly in the White House. That's a good thing, believe me. And we're talking to the governor's team as well. He launched a climate corps just last year, and we were the lead city on that, just jumping out there with a pilot. That's a model we can certainly embrace and scale.
Climate and new energy infrastructure represents one of the biggest areas where we could be creating jobs. Would you agree with that?
Oh, absolutely. And, actually, Biden administration proposed something similar to what Governor Newsom had done, although it seemed to be very focused on rural areas and agriculture and so forth. There's no question it can be brought into cities. As we were just talking to the White House today, they're confident that cities can play a big role, whether it's little things like planting trees in parts of the city where you have a heat island effect. By the way, that's overwhelmingly in low communities.
Right.
Or tearing out lawns to conserve water. We've got a lot of things we can do.
Yeah.
Nicole, tell us about the foundation.
Yeah, I was actually just going to pick up on the point that the mayor just made, because which is connected to what we're doing. Equity is front and center for the Community Foundation. We talked about it, and every time we met this summer, last summer on the Recovery Roundtable, it was about equity and justice. Who's most impacted? Who's most affected by the pandemic? And it just exacerbated all the inequities that existed before. And we talk about a jobs program, that's economic justice. The index pointed out that Black and Latinx workers initially filed unemployment claims 1.5 to 2 times higher than white workers.
Yes.
That's just grown since those early days. And so as we think about things like what kind of jobs program makes sense, always, who needs it the most? Which communities, which populations are most affected? Low income, communities of color, undocumented workers, and particularly undocumented workers who have no access to the federal aid that's been out there. So I bring that up because I think it's fantastic. We've got to think about how the economy did and did not work here in the Valley. Worked for some people, didn't work for a lot of people. So as we build back to a better normal and build a better normal, we've got to keep that in mind. And so at the Community Foundation, as we come out of the crisis, my gosh, how many crises did we face last in 2020? As we come out of exactly half a dozen. As we come out of complete crisis mode into, okay, where do we go from here? The Community Foundation is completely doubling down on equity in our region. And what that means for economic mobility, which includes housing. What does that mean for education, particularly early care and early childhood education, to ensure our kids have the start that they need. But this notion of economic justice in this region, in the most inequitable region, and that was prior to the pandemic. We can do better. We have to do better. And Russ, I loved your framing of the work that was both done for the Recovery Roundtable and the recovery effort that San Mateo County had going. it is going to take the partnerships, the collaborations, so that we aren't just, having multiple efforts trying to go at it and not able to scale. It is going to be impossible to scale individual efforts across the two counties in order to make a real difference. So that is, I think, a really critical thing, and one that we are committed to as well.
My producers just told me that we only have about 90 seconds left.
Great.
Quick, really quick.
Yes.
I hate to be pessimistic, but I think we actually have more disasters in store. And I'm thinking about, for example, climate disasters. Mr.
Right.
Mayor, when you look at Texas, how does that make you feel about San Jose and what's in store for us in the future? And how do we get ready?
Yeah, well, there's no question. We've got a lot of work to do around resilience in particular. And I think a lot of folks is going to be around microgrids and how we can create storage solutions. I know the technology is still evolving. We need to drive it to lower cost and really scale it because we know we've had these challenges before and we saw the scale of devastation in Texas. We had a lot of work to do there.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
And Nicole, I would have to imagine this might be a priority for the foundation in the future as well.
Well, yes. And again, if you look at the communities who are hardest hit when the power fails, guess who doesn't have a generator?
Exactly.
Don't have generators, right? Or access to alternative energies, right? And so absolutely. It's all part of that bigger picture, right? And as we come out and think about the path forward, the exciting thing for me is we're partnering with URUS and joint venture and Stanford University around how do we think about an equitable future for this region, and want to bring other folks to the table, private sector, so what joint ventures doing around just even how it was formulated, right? Private sector, public sector, the nonprofit sector, to understand what is it really going to take for all of us to be rowing in the same direction and bringing the best of what we can do to the same table.
Thank you. I want to thank you both. It's been a great conversation. I always enjoy talking to you both. I wish we could talk for longer, but thank you. And I'm speaking on behalf of the region when I say thank you. Thank you for your leadership, and thank you for the vision that you both have of our region as we look far into the future.
Absolutely.
That's Mayor Sam Liccardo, the Mayor of San Jose. That is Nicole Taylor. She is the CEO and president of Silicon Valley Community Foundation. That brings this session to a conclusion.